everybody, I'm Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics. Tonight we are actually four broads talking politics as we review Hillary Clinton's new book, What Happened. We have with us here Sophy, my co-host.
Hello.
Hi, Sophy. And we have Megan Romer, who is a writer.
Hello.
Who you may know from Twitter. And we have Esther. Hi, Esther.
Hello.
Esther lives in Chicago and is a co-chair of her neighborhood Indivisible group. So thank you guys for joining us. I'm pretty excited to talk about Hillary's book. I have my glass of Chardonnay with me here.
I have my bourbon. This for those
I
who
have a
don't,
Diet Coke, which is the worst idea, but I'm doing it anyway.
well, you know, as long as we've got something, right?
Yeah, I'll never sleep again, but that's fine.
All right, we are four rather verbose people, and this is a long book, and I'm sure we have a lot of thoughts on it. So we're going to try to sort of talk through some questions that Sophy has posed to us, but bear with us, folks, it may get long. So should we maybe just start even before the questions? The questions start at number 0, so I'm going to start at -1, I guess, and just say, did you like the book?
I loved the book. This is Megan, by the way, and I loved it. I really thought it was probably the most nuanced take on the election that I've read or even really expect to read at this point. And I also just think she's a really compelling writer. I mean, she's a strong writer, and it's nice to read her words.
This is Esther. I have to agree. Enjoy is a weird word for something that at times was quite painful, but just from I loved the way she wrote about things. I mean, I knew I was going to enjoy it, and that kind of at the beginning in one of her very first kind of quotations starting out, she kind of cites Nietzsche, but then in parentheses puts also Kelly Clarkson. And I just kind of, pretty much every time she goes into a parenthetical statement, I've, loved it. It was some kind of sly, sarcastic, dry comment on something that was so fine-tuned that really brought I don't know if it was levity, but some needed humor at times. So I really, just from that perspective, I thought it was an incredibly well-written, and then, as Megan brought up, an incredibly nuanced take on an election that was incredibly more complicated than anybody wants to give it credit for.
I agree, and this is Sophy, by the way, and I felt like Esther that I'm not sure I could say that I enjoyed it because it was kind of painful in places, but I was surprised by how much I liked her voice in the book. I guess from and we'll get into this a little bit later on, but I guess from like the advance reaction to the book, I had expected something different. And Hillary Clinton is generally seen as something sort of like a cerebral, like logical person. And so I expected her to be sort of writing more of a, this is what happened, A, B, C, sub-bullet A, B, C sort of book. And it was her voice in it was so relatable. So many times I found myself going like, that's something that I would say. So yeah, as much as one can enjoy revisiting a horrible and harrowing day in one's life, it was enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. So we're back to Kelly here. And I will admit, when Sophy said we should read the book and review it, I really, really didn't want to. I was just sort of dreading reading the book. And I bought it on Kindle, and then I just kept putting it off. And finally I picked it up. And I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I'm glad that I read it, so thanks, Sophy. And I think that everybody should read it. I think it's hard to read for a lot of reasons, but it's hard to read mostly because it's hard to hear someone who's smart right now and think about what could have been. I think that Hillary spent more time working on this book in those however many months than Trump spent thinking about being president. Mm-hmm. So that's hard, but I'm glad I read it, and I think it's a really important and really good read. All right, so we'll move on to our question 0 now on Sophie's list, and that is if we all have a favorite quote. And I will actually start. It's very near the beginning of the book, and she's talking about things she did for self-care, and she's talking about yoga and this breathing technique where you breathe in one nostril and breathe out the other, and she sounds all high-minded, and then she sort of stops and says, It wasn't all yoga and breathing. I also drank my share of Chardonnay, which is perhaps not the most intellectual quote in the book, but it is the one that has stuck with me the entire way through. Because I think at that moment I thought, oh, right, she was also a person dealing with this election the same way that I was.
Mm-hmm.
I also, this is Esther. I had any number of quotes I was trying to pick from, and I ended up going with one kind of when she's talking about actually 2008 and the New Hampshire primary, and she's talking about generally the history of crying in politics, particularly for women who cry in politics. And she says, I was talking about how tough running for office can be, because it can be very tough. And my eyes glistened for a moment, and my voice quavered for about one sentence. That was it. Became the biggest news story in America. It will no doubt merit a line in my obituary someday. Her eyes once watered on camera. And so it's both, again, going back to that, I mean, nobody wants to give her credit for being funny, right? Everybody was so surprised and oh my God, she has a sense of humor. And so there's that funny moment, and yet at the same time, she's laying bare the kind of double standards that women before her and hopefully less, but will continue to face after her, have kind of faced specifically in a political realm. And so that one has kind of stuck with me, or at least that theme stuck with me, and that was, I think, the best and pithiest example I could come up with.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Megan?
Okay, sure. So I think my favorite, there's so much about politics, but there's also this great chapter, and she mentions motherhood and being a wife more than once, but there's this part where she's talking about she and Bill's marriage. Mm-hmm. And she says, I know some people wonder why we're still together. I heard it again in the 2016 campaign that we must have an arrangement. We do. It's called a marriage. And that I helped him become president and then stayed so he could help me become president. No. That we lead completely separate lives and it's just a marriage on paper. He is reading this over my shoulder in our kitchen with our dogs underfoot, and in a minute he will reorganize our bookshelves for the millionth time, which means I will not be able to find any of my books, and once I learn the new system, he'll just redo it again, but I don't mind because he really loves to organize those bookshelves. And I just love it because it's, I think the speculation about their marriage has always been something that is just one of a billion things that we do to women that we don't do to men, mm-hmm. the way sort of. And you even heard this, I heard a lot, even from older women who I respected, like, well, why didn't she leave? These sort of questions. And it's like, because it's not your marriage. Like, it's not for you to even consider this. We, if somebody has a big scandal, we talk about it. Obviously, we talked about the Bill Clinton scandal and his subsequent impeachment and whatnot. But we, with Hillary, like, made it this human thing. Why did she do this? Why did she do that? And just hearing her talk about their marriage, it's like, yes, they're just a married couple and they had terrible times and they had great times. And she does say, like, what if the worst days of your marriage were held, in public with everybody in the world watching? Like, I don't know that any of us, I don't know that there are that many marriages that strong that would have been able to hold up. And just the way she talks about him is so tender and so sweet. And it's really just, I don't know. I just felt like, I'm not quite sure the word, vindicated or something, but just she really just took that on in a really like poignant way that I think I just want to kind of shove it in a lot of people's faces and be like, look, they are obviously in love. Like, first of all, it's none of your business. But secondly, they love each other. They like who talks about the bookshelves like that? Like, that is a deeply kind of ridiculous, loving statement that I just found really charming.
Yeah, I totally agree. Matthew and I were talking about the book, so he hasn't read it, but we were talking about it on a long drive we were on this weekend, and he was sort of, well, they should have known people would want to hear about their marriage. And I said, look, she addresses that in the book, and I read that exact passage and was like, that sounds like love to me.
It sure does.
So my quote is from sort of the beginning of the book, and it's from one of the places where she talks a little bit about her spirituality. And that's one of the places I find her the most relatable. So she starts talking about the parable of the prodigal son. And she says, you may know the parable about the younger of two sons who strays and sins, but finally comes home. He's welcomed lovingly by his father, but resented by his older brother, who had stayed behind and served his father honorably, while the younger brother did whatever he wanted. Maybe it's because I'm the oldest in our family and something of a Girl Scout, but I've always identified with the older brother in the parable. How grating it must have been to see his wayward sibling welcomed back as if nothing had happened. It must have felt as if all his years of hard work and dutiful care meant nothing at all. And I could really identify with that because that was always a difficult parable for me, particularly as a child, because I was also the oldest child and something of a Girl Scout, and it was always very frustrating to me to think of the younger son being welcomed back. And I get the story behind the pericope, I get the moral lesson going on there, but just the setup in the story always bothered me, and I also felt like it was sort of a stand-in for the way Clinton was treated in the election and the way a lot of women are treated in public life, that men can make so many mistakes and yet be welcomed back into the fold, and women can't make any mistakes and yet they can work hard their whole lives, they can be the most qualified and the most educated, and the best people for the job, and still not be quote-unquote liked enough to get the position that they really are the more qualified to have. So I thought that was a really moving part of the book that really spoke to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a total metaphor for this election.
I too am the oldest child and something of a Girl Scout, by the way. I think probably a lot of us are.
All four of us on this podcast at the very least, yes.
Yep.
Yes. I have to admit, having spent more than my fair share of Sundays in church, being the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, but a Presbyterian minister that was a woman, so also having that side of things, I also did not enjoy that parable. I could never quite wrap my head around it, especially when I was younger.
Martha and Mary used to annoy me too. You know,
there's any number of parables that, I mean, they're meant to challenge us, and
I think parables are supposed to annoy us, aren't they?
Yeah.
Wasn't that sort of the
Yes, and pick at all of our wounds and all of our sense of what the way we want the world to be and the way the world should be, but that one, I think any older child is any of the, if you're the eldest, that one probably really sticks in your craw just a bit. So,
well, and I think she comes back in a way to that at the end of the book, where she's talking about, we need to sort of be more open to having conversations with people across the aisle. But she says, why is the burden of opening our hearts only on half the country? Talking about, why do Democrats have to be the ones to sort of open up? And, I think she's still saying we should do it. She's not saying we shouldn't. But, I think I felt that too, in the same way that I sort of feel that parable. It's like, wait, why do I have to do all the work here? Why isn't anyone else responsible for this at the same time? Why don't the people who are Trumpers who, hate us have to find a way to love us too?
I think women in general feel like that a lot, right? Like, aren't we it's sort of the classic burden of compromise always falls on women, and ugh.
Well, you picked my second choice for passage, because I found myself, I think, I don't remember who it was, but some well-meaning person had sent me some kind of inside the mind of the Trump voter, and it was like less than a week after the election, and I did not want to hear it at that stage. I don't really know that I want to hear it any more now, but I believe that was almost my exact reaction of, why do I have to be the only one who, or why do we, they won, why aren't they the ones starting from an empathetic position? They won, right? Shouldn't they be the ones kind of responsible for healing the wounds? Why do we have to both lose and heal, be the healers in this setting? That passage that she brings it up, I just remember having almost that exact same reaction. Why do I have to do this part too?
Yeah, this is going to be something of a therapy session here, isn't it?
I think all discussions of I think actually this book was something of a therapy session for me, frankly.
Obviously, we all like the book a lot. There's a lot of reaction out there in the world of people who did not like the book as much as we did. So what did you hear? It sounds like we all read the book pretty quickly, obviously, but what were